Members, the ayes are 64, the noes are 57. Part 2 will stand part. Members, we now come to Part 3, debate on clauses 13 to 20. The question is that Part 3 stand part.
Chairman.
Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Mr Chairman, I remember not long after I became a Member of Parliament participating in a debate that introduced this very provision that we are now deleting. And I have to say, I welcome the National Party's about-face on this. They've actually got it right at long last, because this repayment bonus was a total rort of the system when they introduced it, and they finally worked that out. But actually, isn't it interesting what difference a couple of years make? Because what were they saying when they introduced this piece of legislation? Well, we'll start with the Minister and the Chair, Peter Dunn, who said, "I say to the House that this is a significant incentive for students to pay their loans earlier." And it gets better. I cannot fathom why anyone would oppose the introduction of such an incentive. This is the Minister now in the chair deleting that very incentive that he couldn't possibly fathom how anybody would be opposed to it, and now he's in the chair doing away with that very same incentive. Well, the Labour Party was right. The Labour Party was right, because this is a rort. It's a total rort, and now they've got the officials' advice to say that it's a total rort. Because what does the Ministry say? The Ministry of Education says that in 2011, last year, in 2011, 2,611 borrowers repaid their student loans in the same year that they borrowed it, receiving about $1.8 million in bonuses, which resulted in a cost to the government. In other words, what the Ministry of Education are claiming is that people who didn't need to take out the loans were taking out the loans in order to get the repayment bonus. So it was a little kickback. So it makes you surprised. I'm surprised the National Party are doing away with this, because they're normally quite good on that sort of stuff, rewarding people for that sort of creating all these loopholes in the system. The National Party are normally quite good at that. That's normally what they quite enjoy doing. Thankfully, in this particular case, they have finally realised that they made an awful mistake when they introduced this ridiculous repayment bonus, which was only ever going to encourage people who didn't need to take out student loans to take out student loans. People have always been able to repay their loans faster. In fact, the National Party, I should say, because they weren't the government at the time, opposed the very thing that halved the repayment times for student loans, which was making them interest-free. It halved the repayment times for student loans. And what did John Key call that? He called it a hoax, and he said he was going to fight it with every bone in his body. Well, I'm not sure how many bones he has left, but interest-free student loans are still here, and John Key didn't put up much of a fight, and now he says he's going to keep the interest-free student loans. Now he says he's going to keep the interest-free student loans. So it wasn't really much of a fight. That was the thing that halved the repayment time for student loans. And then, unfortunately, the National Party, they keep trimming around the edges of it, but we know that eventually they'll get to the point where they say, oh, we just can't afford it anymore. They're softening people up for it. They're trimming all around the edges of student support, with their trimming of student allowance eligibility, with their trimming of who's eligible to get a student loan in the first place. Let's bear in mind the fact that the student loan scheme was set up in the first place to ensure that nobody was prevented from entering tertiary education because of financial barriers. That's why the loan scheme was set up. Of course, the loan scheme itself was set up as a result of a broken promise by the then national government back in 1990, or 1991, I think it was, that they technically did it. I'm not going to get into that, but I do recall the minister at the time had campaigned up and down the country, pledging to do away with university and polytechnic tuition fees, and he would resign if he had not done so. So what they did away with the government-established tuition fees, and instead introduced institutional tuition fees, which were higher than the ones that the government had put in place. And that's right, and they introduced the student loan scheme to allow the students to pay for that, because the criticism at the time was, and it was a legitimate criticism, it was that those new fees introduced by the then National Government as another one of their broken promises, that they were going to act as a barrier to participation. So they set up the student loan scheme in order to overcome some of those barriers. The student loan scheme, I think, has improved remarkably since the Labor government, the then Labor government, back in, Mr Chair, back in 2005, removed the interest on the student loans. It halved, more or less halved, give or take, the repayment times for student loans. I think that was a very positive thing. Those are the sorts of bold initiatives that a bold government takes when it wants to change something. This government wouldn't know a bold initiative if they tripped over it in the street. We haven't seen any bold initiatives in this budget. This most certainly isn't a bold initiative.
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has come to me to leave the chair. Order. The committee is suspended until 9 a.m. tomorrow.